Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the final day of Virtually 2022, Nemensa's free virtual web accessibility conference, taking place as part of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I'd like to say a big thanks to Ronnie for his talk earlier this morning and all of our other speakers that have hosted sessions this week. We'll have all the talk recordings available shortly after the conference, so please do bear with us while we get those online, and I know we've had quite a few questions about those. Up now, though, we've got Max Fumagalli and Marco Fabbri of Depop. Max is a member of the Depop founding team, and Marco is an accessibility specialist and design system owner. So in Max and Marco's talk, Building an Accessible Product, they're going to be sharing Depop's accessibility journey, and how they've worked to make Depop a more accessible and inclusive place for their users. We've got captions provided by MyClearText, which you can either access through Zoom, or alternatively, I will just post a link in the chat, so you can access that through Stream Text, and then you get a kind of a fully accessible, adjustable captions there. So yeah, please do get involved in the chat. Do say hello to each other and just make sure your chat settings are switched to panelists and attendees, and that way everyone can see your messages. And also, please do submit any questions using the Q&A box, and I'll run through these with Max and Marco at the end. So yeah, without further ado, I will hand over to Max and Marco to kick things off.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you, everybody. Actually, thanks, Harry, to have us here at this conference. As Harry said, I'm Max, former head of design UX at Depop, a member of the founding team, and I got with me Marco. If you want to introduce a little bit yourself.
For sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Marco, currently working at Depop as a product designer, and I'm actually accessibility specialist and design system owner, which basically accessibility. After accessibility, I've been then dealing with the design system and design operation particularly.
Cool. So what we would like to do today is just sharing our journey at Depop. We start thinking about accessibility in 2017, and then year by year we try to push the company and our stakeholder to do something in terms of make our product accessible. I added this slide this morning just because maybe some of you don't know Depop, but the main product is mobile apps, Android and iOS. For us, why I tell you that? Because for us was a huge work. It's very, to be honest, with all tools we got on the market today, it's very easy to create and make an accessible product in terms of a web experience, but it's not easier to make an apps accessible. So yeah, Depop is a product, is a tool to buy and sell some stuff. So we add some sentence that our user say to us. So I came from a clothes, but I stay from the culture. This was something important for us since the beginning in 2011. So we try to build a community around this product. People start using our product just because they want to sell clothes or maybe buy a second-hand clothes, but then they find something inside Depop. They find a culture, they find a place where they can inspire other people, a place where they can literally build their own community. So again, we build a tool, but they give a chance to people to find themselves. And yeah, if you can move on the next slide. Again, we talk about community. We got a lot of young designers, young people that literally start in Depop to create their own brand, and we make something. At some point in some post, an article after Etsy last year both acquired Depop, there was something, some journalists say, yeah, Depop is the Depop generation. The Depop company tried to change and achieve some goals. So again, we're talking about young generation. We constantly talk about a community. We constantly talk about people. But at the end, the main question for me as a user experience designer was like, how we are doing to embrace more people, to help more people to use our tools. You can go on the next slide. Yeah, I think this is another sentence. If you go. Again, we usually to say Depop is a place for people who are open to exploring style. That was right, but I like to highlight the word open. And you can find the next slide, my question for the stakeholder. Are we assure them about that? Are we assured that Depop is open to everybody? And I say that no, was not open. Today is a little bit more open. So this is some example from Twitter, from some user. They constantly ask to make Depop more accessible, to help them to use Depop. So that was something important for me again, and for Marco, for the entire team. Say there's a lot of people, they want to use our product because maybe they love the product, maybe they got friends inside the community, they want to be part of the community, but they can't. They can't because Depop was not accessible. If you move to the next slide, for example, this is one slide that then we make to show to our stakeholder, to our to the CEO, CTO, and etc., to all people in the product team. When we unlock the accessibility feature in iOS, this was the result. And I said, if I have some problem in terms of vision and I have to increase the text and to increase the space, this is exactly what I got back from Depop. So again, we don't help anybody. It's a chaos. Maybe some people say, oh, it's cool, it's bold, I love this design, but that was not absolutely cool. People cannot use it. So again, we introduced in the company this concept in A11Y, so accessibility. We try to add some example, and at the end, as happening in a lot of company, you start moving on when you receive a lawsuit. We receive a lawsuit, of course, as a main company. But the good thing about this lawsuit was just related to the web. But at some point, I regroup all the management team and say, we got like an amazing chance here. We don't have to work only on the website. We got a chance to make all our product, the two apps plus the web, accessible. So we can do something good. As we put in this slide, accessible for us is a good experience. We need to make sure then we start a journey, and then we start including more people in our product, in our community. There's some information. Of course, this sentence is old. Was put in the slide in 19, beginning in 2020. But again, 1 of 4 people in US has disability. Sometimes the people stop with themselves and say, yeah, maybe you are blind, or maybe you are just fast. But the problem is like, maybe you can't read very well and you need to increase the font size. And in some product, when you increase the font size, you destroy the layout. You literally, you can't use anymore that product. So there's some fact around Depop based in 2019. Again, more than 30 million users use Depop every day. 32 million items available in the platform. I think today maybe Marco can tell us a little bit more. There are more than 32 million, of course. And again, 1 million, more than 1 million pro sellers. So sellers then they sell for 20, 30, $50,000 a week. Some users earn £20,000 a month. Again, there's a lot of interesting around our product. One of the main goal for us and for me as a leader was, okay, accessible, fine. If we receive a thumbs up from our stakeholder, what we can do? We need to create first of all a team, but we need to create literally a discipline. We need to make sure then if we start this journey can continue, because as I mentioned many times, accessible is a project, and you know when you have to start, or you can start, but you don't know where it's ended, because it's never ended project. So again, try to work alongside to the entire company. I think, yeah, go. No, you can go on the next one. Don't worry, stay with this slide. So again, we need to make sure then after we start this project, this journey, all the people inside the product team can follow us. All the people inside the brand team can follow us. So again, sit down together. we start thinking about how we can achieve this goal. First of all, we ran an audit with an external company, so they check our product and we receive back an I think was a huge Excel file that Mark and I, we start reading line by line and check on the side of our app. More or less it was something that we know, but we check everything because at some point we need to create a plan. The problem in Depop was like, we need to make a plan. We need to go back to our management team and say, okay, this is the plan. This is the time frame. We need these people around us, and this is the effort that we need to put in place. So the main focus was, of course, mobile. The two mobile apps. As I mentioned, the web was easy for us because after we received the audit, we got like literally a to-do list. You need to do this, 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 and that, and fix everything. Let's say was 30% of our effort. The mobile apps, both Android and iOS, for us was something like an unknown. There was no like a clear guideline. There's no like how to make your apps accessible. So we focus in, of course, four main areas: text and icon resizing in terms of visual impediment, touch area, because if you are blind, you need to use some tools then give you like a chance to touch inside. So increase this touch area around icons and all elements. Voiceover and color contrast. Voiceover was one of the, I think, the huge effort, because you start as a designer rethink everything around your screen, but Marco can tell you a little bit more later on this presentation. And so again, to summarize all of this, we need to visualize something. So we take some sketches and something like that and say, okay, this is what we have to do on the first week. We need to think about how we can introduce a voiceover. So we need to start thinking about the screen like it's like when you write a text. You need to start with the title and then maybe the subtitle, the description, some element, and everything need to be active in terms of description, because the voiceover need to read exactly what is in the screen. So again, some example, because at the meantime, we start create like our documentation, because we need to make sure that all our knowledge and then we acquire day by day was shareable to the entire company. So again, this was the starting plan. We start communicate the AD, so the starting point. Then we start doing some internal training. Internal training before we design it, then product manager, and then engineer, developers, and the QA. And then, of course, we decide to set our deadline, because as I mentioned before, when you start accessibility, you know when you start, you don't know when you finish. But for us, it was important to set up a deadline, because we would like to make sure that at the end of the day, our product was accessible in the first instance. And then the final goal was to create this guild of members. So people that inside today is still there inside Depop take care about accessibility. They can check everything, and they are the champion of accessibility inside the company. This is something important. As we mentioned before, you need to create a process. Then you can, after you go your process, then you can jump in the roadmap. The roadmap is something then is important, because at some point we explain to Depop, we need to change our mindset. We need to change how we design feature, not only in terms of UX UI, but literally how we design the feature before, with the product manager, with our stakeholder, with our devs team. And we need to make sure that accessibility is one of the first, is on top of the list. You need to start thinking about design with accessibility in mind. Otherwise, we go back to the situation we were before. So step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, you are ready with the feature, and then someone say, oh, but is this feature accessible? No, it's too late now, because you can't stop the feature. So you go live with a feature, then it's not accessible. So we try to convince everybody to start this loop and put accessible on the first step. So you need to make sure then you start with accessible in mind, as we said before. And now it's time for me to pause a little bit, and Marco can start explaining it to you how we make this product accessible. And again, I'm very keen to tell you that for us was an amazing learning moment, because as I mentioned before, there was no documentation. We tried to check everything around our product, outside our product, in other competitors, and all the main apps. So with Marco, but I think Marco did 70% of the design stuff. Literally, we redesign each screen of our app to make sure that we got like a visual comparison with the, let's say, the default status and then the maximum accessible status. But yeah, please, Marco, you can go ahead with the next slide.
Yeah, thank you so much, Max, and thank you so much for all of you to be here. I think I just wanted to say that I'm super honored to talk about accessibility on the Accessibility Awareness Day. And also talking about this topic that I think for me and Max has been like he already said, but it's been, apart from being like a project that was very interesting, I think it's something that holds, I have a lot of memories about, and it's been like very nice to understand more about what accessibility means for our product and our users. So Max gave you a very good overview of the work that was necessary and what was missing at the beginning, and what was our North Star. I think we are going to go a little bit into the details of the operation that we needed to go through, from creating a process to study a little bit more what does it mean to be accessible, how do we apply it to the design, how do we do the handoff with the developers. So we're going to get a little bit more in the nitty-gritty of stuff. So we, if I need to explain you how we basically structure everything in 3 macro categories, I think there was definitely a first part where we were kind of very busy into like the discovery phase, where we needed to learn a little bit more about the space of accessibility and what was exactly required for us to do. And the second area following the first one was to define what was for us an ideal delivery and experience that we should create, because that was also necessary in order to picture the sort of end goal that will not end. It will end like only for the deadline that we had for product, but it's certainly not stopped right now, which is also very good news. So we still like working on accessibility at the moment, and then the deliver part, where we like needed to actually make things happen in the code and make sure that everything was kind of set up. There is a lot of complexities on all 3 categories. I think we can deep dive into the discovery phase. So this is the point where PMs were kind of understanding the regulation. We needed to identify the problems in order to propose a plan to the stakeholders. In this case, identifying the problem, it was more related to the audit that we had. The audit that we received was containing 300 pages of issues. I can share it right now. This is actually the structure of the document, how it was basically given to us. It's actually like a PDF. We had a XML as well, containing all the different information. You could navigate through the different issues. you could understand what kind of level of severity you got, why that specific component was failing and was not passing the accessibility guidelines, and that was like 165. I can read it here. 165 pages for Android. We had the 300 pages for iOS, and then we had several hundred for web. So it was literally we needed to go through it like every issue one by one, listing and understanding what was all about. So you can understand the amount of complexities that we had. Plus, we didn't have the knowledge on accessibility, so it was something that we were starting from zero. And when you don't know exactly what like voiceover or like non-text content means, or info and relationship, I spent, I think, a lot of time just deep diving into the guidelines to actually understand what does really mean this in terms of design, and how do we apply into mobile web, into mobile, honestly, because these rules are more for web, and they were kind of these kind of criteria, they were applied into the mobile area. And so there was also some sort of interpretation from our side on how do we exactly perform and translate all this issue into the mobile platform, which is like an iOS and Android from in our case. On the business side, we needed to discover like what was exactly the strategy, what are the dependency, how do we perform this, what is the best approach that we can go for. Like in simple practice manner, there was a lot of question on like if we modify some part of the code to perform some accessibility fixes, and then another team in the production team is gonna perform like is gonna replace that component with another one, with a new one. How do we manage that? Like the accessibility traits will be completely destroyed because it's gonna be a completely new component. So we needed to make sure that dependency with other teams, they were calculated, and that we weren't stepping on each other's foot, basically. We needed to make sure that we weren't doing the work that we needed to repeat, or potentially involving other production team, training them so that they could support us in the effort of building accessibility when there were touch-basing components that we actually needed to touch base in the future and fix in the future. So if in our roadmap we needed to fix something on profile, and like a team two needed to work on profile, then we could possibly exchange some knowledge and perform some fixes there ahead of time.
Yeah, sorry, Marco. Just want to add something. And in terms of support, especially in the beginning, the best support we received was more or less a shout from another team and to tell us, oh, by the way, guys, we are going to introduce a new feature, or we are going to redesign this component and this page. So let us know what we have to do in terms of accessibility. In the beginning, this was the best help they can give us because it's more like give like a shout out to say, guys, have a look because we are going to do something new, and maybe you can tell us how it's going.
Yeah, there's been several situations like that, and it was fun. It wasn't fun. I don't know. It was just like a little bit of a mix and mash of coordination happening in real time. The second area that we got was to define basically the risk, define the what sort of mitigation plan we needed to have in case specific dependency were kind of arising in the product roadmap. What kind of priority we should have had in terms of design? What should we fix first? What should we kind of focus our energy on at first? And then how do we also hand off the files to the developers? Just as a context, at the beginning, when I started working on this in terms of design specs with Max, it was like we didn't have a development team yet. We were still figuring out how do we get engineers, like there was a lot of question around like what is the best approach in terms of like people having working on accessibility. And so we start working, and then we did the handoff, but we needed to also make sure that what we were doing in terms of design was actually reflecting quite well with the engineering knowledge. So we were kind of doing multiple meetings with engineers, leads, to actually say like, are we actually doing the right thing here? Is there a better way to hand off this, specifically for the voiceover? We had a lot of chat. I'm gonna deep dive into that later. And then also we did a competitor analysis, and we needed to understand how do we test this product that we're making accessible, but we want to have the opinion of user using this product. We needed to make sure that it wasn't just part of a quantitative research, but it was like also qualitative. So at the very end, we actually verified that what we built was needed to be accessible. So there was also conversation around the approach for that. In terms of competitor analysis, we've been looking into what existing at the moment. I've been saying already the difference between web guidelines and mobile guidelines, which at the moment they don't really exist. There is like some interpretation of them. So what we needed to do is finding the best accessible product, or like the best product that people are using in a way that they are already embedding accessibility, that we know they have done a lot of work around that because they probably have already a team that is focusing on that. And so we look into Airbnb, we look into Apple, we look into Instagram, we look into other competitors like Etsy, we looked into ASOS, into the shopping marketplace, basically. But I think these three actually are were actually standing out a little bit more than others. I can see there were quite a bit of work that they've been putting into. So we learned a lot from them, and I would definitely recommend if some of you is actually starting on accessibility to just like play around, going on settings and just like try to see how that performs into other apps. And I mean, for me, it was eye-opening. I just started using accessibility also for myself for like expanding text resize. I was just going, I was just having text resize like increase because it was helping so much me through the day by day.
Yeah, Marco is right. This is another thing we recommend to you is try to activate the accessibility feature and menu inside our device when you start, because you realize how hard it is for some user to use your product. But actually, you start familiarize a little bit with the product instead. iOS and Android give you a lot of tools for free, but you need to integrate these tools inside your apps, your product. I remember Mark and I, we close ourselves many times out of our phone because we try to use for the entire day our device only with a voiceover. And believe me, it's not easy at all if you are not one of the users that need to use a voiceover. But you realize how important it is to describe something on screen if you can't see that screen.
Yeah, correct. It was actually eyes-opening, and we looked into several different documentation also to understand a little bit more around the topic. In that way, the prioritization process that we had from listing all the different issues was like from the audit, you can see on the left side, we scan them and we translate them into a document on Confluence. That document, as you can see, is actually split by severity, the amount of cases, the effort that are required from designer to actually do some sort of specs for the developers. And they were kind of trying to give like a priority there. And then you can see on the there is like a Google sheet basically there where we have all of them listed in terms of like, are they out of scope for now, the priority, are they in the backlog? And we gave that kind of spectrum of priority that then was basically simulated on Jira board. And once we got like the developers working on that, we basically created AC, accessibility, acceptance criteria, and we take it from there, so that developer were kind of getting into the zone of accessibility as well, with all the details provided and with some sort of like shortened like version of like what we received at the beginning. Like what we received at the beginning was like the raw version. We transform it into a much more readable way. And so the team was formed with once we agree on the approach, we actually had the buy-in from the stakeholders and the product, and it took a couple of months to have the full team that you see here available. We started with a product manager mainly, and the ADM, the designer were the first one, and then we gradually had developers from iOS and then Android and then web development as well. So I think it was quite a good bunch of people at the very end dealing with this project, and this is just the core team. What we really collaborated was like basically across the company with loads of people. So yeah, this is exactly the core team itself. And then the last part, it was the delivery, where we basically stated like, okay, how do we QA, how do we release to the product, how do we keep accessibility conversation in the company after we moved from the lawsuit deadline. How do we create the culture? How do we train people? And yeah, how do we define a definition of rate, definition of time? It was quite a bit of work. I hope I can cover that. But now we are going to go a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of what does it mean to do text resize, what does it mean to do color contrast fixes, how do we prepare the file with the design, and so on. So on the text resize, basically how we dealt with that, I mean, it's so from a design perspective, it was quite shocking for me to realize that developers doesn't have control on the amount of dimension that the character was actually increased. When you go to settings, you can have this kind of option to increase the larger text. Now, how, like the question for me was like, how do I design for this? How do I get it right? How do I design a screen from 100%? That is like the default version that the iOS is coming with. How do I kind of represent this in my design? And so I needed to have some percentage. I needed to have some points of reference. So I've been asking to developers saying like, we don't know, because this is coming from native iOS. So it's more like I needed to basically take the screenshot like you see right now, and I calculated the percentage of increase from point A to B, and then I said, all right, this is pretty much 140%. And then when the larger accessibility size is like increased with the toggle, then it's like 320. So that I can make that percentage apply to the original dimension point of the text, and then create more designs like this one, where you can actually see the difference of the text inside our app, how it should look, and developers could use this to perform their code fixes, how the element should move from one side to another. Is the item on the right like going to be underneath the username or vice versa? There were several questions actually, and this helped a lot the developers to understand, all right, the arrow stays on top, like this is okay. Then the message can be like full width and can go over the image on the right. So definitely very useful for the developers to receive this. We also had several different testing phase, like where developers, once they build the product, they were actually having they were giving us demo. So we had pretty much like two demos a week when we were like kind of full on into accessibility. We were up to speed, and it was quite fun, and we could see the changes applied to the product easily. VoiceOver. The VoiceOver was actually the most fun part for me. I think for us, it was definitely a reality check. We thought a lot of things about VoiceOver. We thought that the reading of the VoiceOver were starting from top to bottom. From the most important one and to the least important one. I think this comes a little bit from being biased, being able to see on the screen. We often use a lot of visual clues to prompt users to most important elements that they should read, but that doesn't happen in the VoiceOver world. Like that's a completely different approach. VoiceOver, what basically we learn is that it should read the element from top to bottom, left to right. It should never basically start from element on the middle of the screen that we think is relevant because it's a banner and it's like red. Like VoiceOver like really doesn't care about that. And the reason why is because if you prompt a VoiceOver focus on the banner that is in the middle of the screen, the user will never know where exactly on the page is going to be. So he will start like, or she will start navigates, but not knowing exactly what is the starting point. And one of the most important thing is like actually having only one specific type of navigation for the VoiceOver that doesn't change in any other screens. They standardize completely, and that's also the way like people are reading at the moment with the VoiceOver. So
just adding something to explain very quickly to our colleagues and team member how VoiceOver works. At some point we say we need to start rethinking about the hierarchy inside the screen, inside a page, inside a web page. Is exactly when you want to it's exactly when you walk inside your bedroom with the light off. You can't turn off the light, and you need to go and check your wardrobe and pick one of the item because you want to change your dress code. It's impossible if you don't remember, if you don't know where these items are. So you need to have someone who literally can tell you what happened around you. So this is why it's important then at some point we started playing with VoiceOver to understand how the system read the screen, because we need to adapt our design to the VoiceOver, to the screen reader. We can't change the screen reader based on what we think, because there are some rules, and the people they have it, they need to check. And of course, all this decision we thought was not just because at some point we were super smart. We start testing with the blind users, so they tell us how the VoiceOver works. And by the way, surprise, we at some point we realized that VoiceOver for people is I think it's part 3 in terms of velocity. So literally you can't understand immediately what's going on, but they can. And this was another learning point for us.
Yeah, and linking to that, the way that we managed to communicate how to label all the different components into the code. Like, I just want to give you a quick example, right? When we first enable VoiceOver in our app, this icon here, and that is like on the 28th point, this one was read lock. So it was read like a lock because it does have some sort of like identification from iOS, from native. And the identification, I think it was like related to lock. So the icon that was like for us bag was actually read as lock, and it wasn't working. Simply like some part they weren't even labeled. So we needed to relabel everything. Every component that we have in the app now, it's labeled with accessibility traits, and there were like 3 main traits, yeah, that we basically used: the label, the trait, and the hint. Label is actually stating like what is in the description, simple as that in the UI. Just like we never changed like the label in the description. Like if it changed in the UI, we change it in the VoiceOver. Traits are basically on the iOS side, they are native. They help us dealing with direction the user in a native way. We don't need to write too many hints. Hint are basically extra piece of text that we can use after the identification of the element with the trait, and you often use them to say how to perform an action, or like where. I think the rules, the general thumb rule there is like, you should not communicate to the user how to perform an action. You should communicate to the user where they will go once the action is performed. In some ways, Android can be different. They can have different native traits and so on.
Yeah.
Moving forward, touch area. Touch area was another big problem because we had several different buttons that weren't having heights and dimension that were accessible. So in this case, we had some buttons that were like 28 pixels. We needed to create like a design solution to have the touchable area at 44 pixels. And that's only for iOS. And then for Android, it's 48. So the rules is a bit different there. We are honestly moving towards like having 48 everywhere. For the main scope and MVP, we basically needed to find a compromise in a way where if the button for us, they were changing for height, it was like a massive amount of effort, but we needed to make that happen. So in a way, what we managed to do in specific screens is like building a hidden touchable area that is like 44 or 48 pixels underneath the button, that in some cases can be like 32. And in those cases, like we were trying to remove the first need of the user, that was like being able to tap on an on a button without overlapping actions because the buttons were too close to each other. So providing a good touchable area was actually the main improvement, and we did that by just sharing documentation with this kind of blue touch area that's developer will build underneath the element to make it tappable. And in terms of color contrast, which is, I think, the last issue, in this case, we had a couple of work that we needed to do in terms of like the red color. The red color is our brand color, and changing the red color wasn't that easy. If we needed to change it, we needed to change it in a way that would have been accessible. So we needed to apply some changes in there. We needed to communicate it to marketplace team. The entire business needed to know that we actually needed to change the red color into a different one. So we needed to make it darker. That for sure like was changing a little bit how we were dealing with the colors inside the company. I think it was like a good first step, not having any sort of like a white text on top of the red color. And in terms of brand, we are still like making sure that we keep the conversation going on some cases. This is just related on mobile. In printing, it's completely different word, so you can use the red. So there is also a pattern of like, how do we make it consistent and so on. So just to give you an example, the first screen is what we had before, and the second screen is what we basically changed. You can see that the red was slightly changing. The blue was also slightly changing, the yellow on the buttons, and this was all made also on the gray that were like one of the most important colors that we had, because they were always on the white background, the sold yellow color, and so on. So in a way, you can already see how is it possible to QA this, if like it's so hard to spot changes like this. But we needed to make sure that also in terms of QA, we were spotting all the issues that that we were changing, and it was only possible through different type of devices, plugins that I'm gonna just have them listed at the end of the slide. And then we perform basically throughout the process this kind of qualitative and quantitative audits. On the left side, you can see the amount of issues that we actually decrease. So we decrease quite a bit. Like overall, we have like honestly like a few high severity issues at the moment compared to before. That was like much more. And in terms of overall user score, we actually we didn't have a benchmark on how we were doing at the beginning, because we didn't have accessibility honestly included. So it was quite hard to I think it was quite hard to run some qualitative information there. But yeah, we actually have a very good score on the user testing side. And you can see the 102 over like 120. People now are able to actually browse, buy an item, sign up onto the app, browse and search and delist an item. They can do everything they want, and it's all basically accessible on that side. And then we had for sure to build the training. So we needed to build the documentation. We created some design checklists, like what should you do every time that you think about a new feature? What should you consider? And so you can see underneath here, there are several different documentation that we link, plugins, and so on, for designer to actually say, all right, did I do that? Yes or no? Like maybe I should check this, to have like a general information. And also we run different meetings and training, and for every new joiner we run what is accessibility. We give that sort of education to every designer. In terms of product, that's happening the same. There was documentation on how we release into the product, how do we make this happen, how do we make QA, and so on, like I told you before. And the second phase was also to deliver this in into the design system. And we also made, for example, for textiles, we now have an accessibility tab where you can select the accessibility font. You don't need to do with the weird calculation that I was doing before with 120% and 160%, whatever, and transform your text out. You can simply use the design system, and it will do it for you, which was quite cool. So this is from where we were before, and the average issue was like 80 issues per platform. And now we can definitely say that we are accessible compliant, and we still have several issues to go through. People are struggling to understand the item thumbnails, what is the seller, and what are the description when they tap on an icon, when they tap on a thumbnail on search. But I think we are getting there. We also build an accessibility guild, and we are building this culture inside our company to promote accessibility further and further. And now we are, I think, 12 people in accessibility guild. So that's
there's one thing I would like to add to what Marco said before. As we mentioned in the beginning, we start a journey. Of course, we know what we did was good and was an important achievement for the company, for ourselves in terms of learning. Is maybe is only the 20% what we can do. There is an important part, and we need to take care of some point. Actually, they need to take care of some point. All the items inside the Depop are user items. So all the content is a user-generated content. So what we need to do is maybe try to find a way like Instagram did. So the people need to be more sensible, need to be open in terms of accessibility. As a seller, I need to add maybe a description about my picture, because of course what we did was try to describe the picture with the description. But again, it's different to read the description related to an item and understand what is inside that, what the photo represents. At the same time, we start working with our machine learning team to find a way maybe to make this alternative description automatically inside Depop, so the user they don't have to do anything more. Again, it's a long process because, as I mentioned before, we start this journey with 32 plus million items inside our platform. I think today there are a little bit more. So it's impossible to do this manually. It's impossible to go back to our user and ask them to edit each item and add an alternative description. But it's something that we can recommend to do. I think the next slide is more or less a recap. As we mentioned in the beginning, today we are proud of this slide because we plan ahead. So accessibility is step one every time we doing something. Again, this doesn't mean then we are perfect. This doesn't mean then everything we got live is okay. The guild then we create exists because we need to check our work many times, and we need to find time to fix what we did wrong. But in terms of achievement, of course, we receive a good feedback from our community. As I said in the beginning, for us, the amazing goal was like, finally, we help more people to use our product. We start doing some user research and user testing with the people with some impairment, and we did something with our partner. Like Nomensa. So there is a lot of company that can help you in the first instance to deal with issue. One of our partner Usablenet, they got like an internal testing team, so they test the voiceover for us. And of course, at the end, you can be sure then 100% what you did is okay. You need constantly check. And what we learn. Personally, I learn a lot. I learn how you can, if today I have to start a product from scratch, I start everything with accessibility in mind. But the best thing I learn is like, it's very hard to convince everybody, to convince your stakeholder, to convince your CEO, your CFO to invest in accessibility. But you need to put yourself in a situation that you don't have to give up. is important, then your product need to be usable, need to be useful for everybody. Let them decide if the product is okay. Don't close your door. This is the main thing I learned. I don't know you, Mark, if you want to add more in terms of what we learned.
I learned that accessibility never ends. Honestly, it's like I am still here championing accessibility and trying to make sure that the work that we have done is not going to be compromised, and that is still there, because it's a lot of effort if you have like a business running for years and you need to make it accessible. Probably it will be easier for like a product to start with accessibility first in mind and building up from there. But we were there, like Depop, I mean, it was like quite 7 years already in the back. So it's a lot of years of code to go through.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's the main one.
Yeah. I think that the last slide is more or less to tell you what we use in the beginning to help ourselves as a designer and the team, some plugins, but today you can find more and more tools. Start plugin is something that is very close to me, because we start using this plugin Sketch and then they create in Figma. I start supporting this company in terms of I help them to deliver the best product. Now they start building a Mac app to help all design and product people to deal with accessibility. So they are doing a very great job. And as I mentioned before, you need to ask help. A part of tools, so you need to put yourself. The best tools is yourself inside an accessibility environment. You need to make sure that you understand what happened inside your device. In our case, on your web, you can download the tools for free and start using. You can activate your every accessible feature inside your mobile phone, no matter the platform, and start understand what's happened. And maybe try to be the accessibility champion inside your team, your company, and etc. So, yeah, I think there was a question, but Mary,
I started answering a little bit, but yeah, I hope it's fine. I don't know if I answered them or if there's still like questions. So.
Awesome. No, thanks, Max and Marco. Yeah, it was a great talk, and yeah, an awesome company, and yeah, it's really interesting to hear the Depop journey and how you basically started again and redesigned everything. And it's really great how open you are, and you know how listening to like the story of how you kind of changed the culture within the company. To always start kind of with accessibility in mind. If anyone does have any questions, we might have time for one if anyone wants to submit one. But
yeah, I think there was a question related to the time frame. So work and make the both apps accessible took us more or less a year and a half. Because as you mentioned, Henry, was not just redesign and readapt our design, but was literally create the code and support accessibility inside our apps. So it's not something that you can do in a day if you arrive late as we arrive. If you start today, maybe you don't have to spend a year to make your product accessible. This is the best learning.
It's like the design part started like I think in June 2020. I've been writing on the answer, and deadline was around like March or April, like somewhere.
Yeah.
Deadline, but yeah, lots of work, lots of fun as well. It's not just that work.
It's not easy at all, but it's something that you have to do.
No, that's awesome. No, thank you. I mean, yeah, it's I think it's quite rare to find people from an organization that would be so open kind of about about the journey they've been on. And no, thank you very much for sharing that. And yeah, thank you to everyone that's tuned in. That is just about all we've got time for. We are back in an hour for the final session of Virtually 2022, which is a panel discussion on what makes an accessible organisation, hosted by Alistair Campbell, our Director of Accessibility here at Nomensa. Thanks again, and yeah, we'll see you all back in an hour. Thank you.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Andrew.
Bye.